After that introduction, I feel like I should be taller. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I really appreciate it. I want to talk with you all today about the Internet of Things. And it might interest you to know that today there are many more connected devices than there are humans on Earth. And if we think about it, we're really talking about this connected world. And I want to talk a little bit about what it is, where we're headed. But I really want to start with you. So this is the audience participation part of the talk. And the question is, are you connected? So how many of you have a Fitbit? Raise your hand. Keep your hand up. How many of you have an Alexa assistant at home? Okay. How many of you have a Roomba connected vacuum cleaner? Very useful if you have pet hair. How many of you know someone or have an implantable connected medical device, a pacemaker or an insulin pump or something like that, maybe somebody in your family? How many of you have an iPhone? There you go. How many of you have a Tesla? Alyssa, this would be you. How many of you have ever been caught speeding or running a red light by a surveillance camera? You don't have to answer that one. So if you think about it, I would say most, if not all of you, have connected devices. And so welcome to your world, which is the world of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is a deeply interconnected set of sensors and cameras and smart systems and all kinds of devices and other technologies that are connected to one another, that share and exchange data, that work together to make decisions, and often operate autonomously in the background, with or without you knowing it. And that turns out to be the rub a lot of the time. The Internet of Things has the promise of technology that will really enhance our environment. So the idea is that the Internet of Things, or the IoT, is going to empower people through technology and technology through intelligence. And we're seeing that now. At this nascent point in the Internet of Things, we're seeing autonomous decision-making, we're seeing products that provide customization and personalization, optimization. We're seeing monitoring that make environments safer, that help us understand what's going on. We're seeing efficiencies. We're seeing smart technologies. We're seeing IoTs that run cities and drive cars, that fly planes, that tell the grocery store when you're out of milk in your refrigerator, and all of these kinds of things. So these benefits are driving greater and greater uptake of the Internet of Things. So how prevalent is it? Well, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. So the Internet of Things will become more ubiquitous and more unavoidable as time goes on. These days, Gartner predicts that there's about 20 billion things in the Internet of Things as of next year. That's roughly 3 times the number of devices for every human on Earth. The Internet of Things is supposed to bring in an economic impact of between $4 and $11 trillion, trillion with a T, by 2025. The surveillance industry alone is bringing in roughly $63 billion by 2022. We expect almost all, if not all, cars to be self-driving by 2050. So the Internet of Things is truly an environment that is going to promise to change pretty much everything in our society. So, what are the benefits of that? And it turns out that there are many benefits of the Internet of Things. And if you think about it, it's changing medicine. We already have robotic surgery, and that means that whether your surgeon is in the operating room with you or whether the surgeon is hundreds of miles away, they can use precise instruments to operate on people. We think about robots in a lot of environments, but one really interesting use of robots is to send them into disaster scenarios and allow them to save humans and other kinds of things in toxic environments. How many of you have had an avocado lately? Here's precision agriculture with avocado plants. And precision agriculture allows us to use sensors to decide how much nitrogen is needed, how much water is needed, how much fertilizer is needed at the resolution of an individual plant. And so your smart tractor and your smart combine and all of your smart vehicles on the farm can actually apply just the amount of resource that those plants need. For farmers, that means they have higher yield, that means that it supports economics for them, but it also makes their farms more sustainable because they don't have to put a lot of nitrogen in the soil if only some plants need it. So there are a lot of really great benefits to the Internet of Things, and enough so that it is ubiquitous and it is increasing over time. On the other hand, there's a lot of risks of the Internet of Things as well. So there have been multiple articles about security problems with baby monitors, where these connected baby monitors, intruders have hacked them, they've screamed at babies, they've threatened parents, pretty scary stuff. We've seen crashes of self-driving cars, we've seen conversations that have been taken up by Alexa being shared inappropriately. We've been seeing cyber vulnerabilities of pacemakers and other kinds of connected devices. We've seen a lot of surveillance, and there's a real national discussion going on as to whether that is protective or intrusive. When is surveillance good and when is surveillance too much? And so, the question becomes, is the IoT a future utopia or is it a future dystopia? And that's a real question for all of us. And the fact is, how the IoT fulfills its promise to be beneficial or put us at risk is really up to us. And it's up to us as we develop and nurture the IoT that we'll be seeing in the future. So how do we embed these amazing technologies in the larger world? How do we move the IoT towards benefits and not towards risk? And so one thing to think about is it may be kind of reassuring to know that we've actually been here before. So not many of us are old enough to remember the Industrial Revolution. But what we always see is when there are disruptive technologies, you see a tremendous technological advance. But the social frameworks and the ethical guidelines for sort of using these technologies take a while to catch up. So this is an image, thank you Wikipedia, which I just donated to, by the way, of the Iron Bridge. Yesterday was Giving Tuesday, right? Of the Iron Bridge at Shropshire. This really happened during the Industrial Revolution, and because it became much easier to manufacture iron, we had steam power that was more ubiquitous, we had iron production, and chemical manufacturing became more ubiquitous. And it turns out that all of these goods and services really, really changed life. But the goods and services and the technologies, in some sense, might not have been the most important changes. The most important changes were social and economic changes. So if you think about it, it was a time when cities really grew. Standard of living really grew. It was our first factories. It was the first time people could get lots of goods and services. It changed what people learn. It changed the economy. It was the first time we saw child labor laws and some of the first environmental laws. So if you think about the social and the environmental and the ethical and all of the other sort of big social ecosystem that surrounded these technologies, they were at least as important as the technologies themselves. And we're in that environment now. So we're in the environment where we start looking at all these wonderful disruptive technologies, but maybe the most disruptive part is what are we going to do with the social framework, with the planetary impacts that are going to host them. So when I start thinking about the Industrial Revolution, just as I think about the Internet of Things, it's reasonable to think about, well, what does success look like? What does success look like for the Internet of Things? And if I want a public-focused IoT utopia, I should have real measures of success. And reasonable measures of success are, first of all, we need to have a planet that sustains the Internet of Things, so the IoT should be good for the environment. And if we go a little bit deeper on that, what does that mean? It needs to promote sustainability, it needs to minimize e-waste, it needs to avoid depletion of rare materials, et cetera. And then, of course, society lives on our planet Earth, so we want the IoT to be good for us. And what does that mean? We need to be safe and secure. We need to be able to have reasonable privacy. We need to be able to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks. And so, that's a great vision, but how do we get there? How are we going to get to that kind of IoT? And it turns out that there's going to be a lot of players in that. All of us are going to be involved. It's going to be really important for the government to be involved because there's going to need to be policy and legislation and some sort of social framework. It'll be important for business to be involved so we can responsibly design IoT products. It'll be important for the public to expect transparency and an understanding of what good use, appropriate use is. It'll even be important for us in academia to help make people aware of what the rewards and the risks are of the IoT and to be able to help new innovators really deal with the kinds of problems that we're going to see. So it turns out that all of this is really hard. Let me say that again. All of this is really hard. And let's sort of take a little bit deeper dive into what some of these issues are, why they're so complex, and why they're so hard by looking at arguably what many people's favorite IoT system is, self-driving cars. So let's think about self-driving cars for the IoT. And we're going to just look at a case study on this, and we're going to ask ourselves the question, are self-driving cars good for the environment? Are they good for us? But before we do that, let's level set a little bit. And let's see, how do self-driving cars actually work so we know what we're talking about. So it turns out that a self-driving car is basically a car and stuff, right? And the stuff is components that help the car see and computers that help the car analyze what those components see and model what the car is supposed to do and then tell the car to actually actuate what it says. And self-driving cars drive just like you and I do. So what we do is we sense our environment, we plan what we're going to do, and then we act. And of course, we do that in a fraction of a second. And a self-driving car needs to do that as well. So the Society of Automotive Engineers actually grade cars in terms of their ability to self-drive. So a level 0 and a level 1 car is the absolute bottom. So level 0 car, none of us have that. That's like the Schwinn bike that some of you had when you were a kid. It has no, any system that's really going to help you other than your own power. But a level 1 car is like my car. I have a 2014 Subaru. It has a few systems, a radio, things like that. It doesn't help me back up. It doesn't help me figure out where the lanes are. It doesn't help me do anything. And I drive it okay. So that's a level 1 car. These days, the cars that you can get commercially are typically level 2 and level 3 cars. And those are cars that expect the driver to be more or less engaged. So a level 2 car has a few systems, and as you can see on the image, it has GPS and video camera and perhaps some other things to help you with. Level 3, level 4, level 5 cars have a lot more stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But the idea is that many of these cars can do some driving or some kinds of functions on their own. You have to help them with the rest. Now, the fact is we have no level 5 cars yet. So a level 5 car is a car that can drive itself, it doesn't need a driver, and it can do that in all possible scenarios. We have no car that does that yet. Waymo and GM and Uber and a bunch of other companies are working on level 4 cars for ride sharing, right? And these are all sort of still in the pilot stage. The kind of cars that you can buy, that Alyssa bought, is a level 3 car. So if you have a Tesla or some other car that can do a fair amount of the driving for you, that's sort of the state of the art today. And the state of the art is changing fast. So how do these self-driving cars see? And it turns out that they sense their environment using a variety of different kinds of sensors. They may bounce light waves or radio waves or sound waves, depending on which the component is. And each of these components, each of these sensor systems, have different benefits, they have different liabilities, they have different ranges, and they have different error modes. And so the idea is to have a number of them so that in combination, it's going to be fairly reliable. You're going to get exactly the resolution and precision that you need to drive safely, and you're going to be able to drive well. And as you can see from the picture, they're going to handle different parts of the driving. So how the car sees turns out to be an amazing engineering feat, is to try to figure out what's the error range, how do these systems be able to replicate each other, when do I need one system and when do I need another? So the question is like, okay, that's how it sees, what about what it sees? So this is a very cool clip of a TED Talk given by Chris Armstrong from a few years ago. He worked for the Google self-driving car, and it shows you how complicated this model actually is. So what you see is pedestrians. You have to figure out whether they're stationary pedestrians, like law enforcement, who might be directing traffic, or whether they're going to be moving. You see bicyclists. You see different kinds of cars and trucks. There's construction there. You have to pay attention to where the lines are and where the obstacles might be, and who might be doing something that's a little unanticipated. So you want to be able to model that as well. And just in terms of looking at what an amazing feat it is to write a program that can do this even a fraction of a time, it's a little mind-blowing, because these are incredibly difficult models to develop. And in some sense, I've read that these are actually harder than airplane models because of all the things that happen on the road. Now, if you came here on an airplane, or you've ridden on an airplane recently, a lot of what your airplane does is autonomous, right? And the pilots are needed for some things, but a lot of what the airplane does doesn't involve the pilots. Well, a self-driving car, we're trying to get certainly to that point, and it turns out that it's harder. So how prevalent are self-driving cars today? How prevalent are the cars where you want to see this kind of a model? And it turns out today that only a fraction of the cars that we see on the road, roughly 1% or less, are self-driving in any way, shape, or form. Basically, set level 3 and up. And here's some statistics that might kind of help us understand that we're not yet prevalent at all. There were about 1.4 billion cars in 2017. There were, by 2020, we expect there to be about 10 million, and that's level 3 and above self-driving cars. Americans drove more than 3 trillion miles. Waymo's car, which is the one that has sort of the big reward, now travels about 8 million miles on public roads. So again, it's really a fraction. But as you can see from this graph, the predicted sales of self-driving cars, and of course none of our cars now will be driving in 2050, very few of them, make it more and more ubiquitous. So by 2050, we'll be selling almost all self-driving cars, and almost all self-driving cars will be on the road. Okay, so that gives us a little sense that they're not prevalent yet, but they're going to be, that I basically have a car with a whole bunch of gear, and that this is really going to be the future of transportation in some sort of a real way. So let's get back to sort of our measures of success, and let's start with the measure of success is a self-driving car good for the environment? And it turns out that the answer is not yet. So you have both electric cars and fuel-injected cars that are self-driving these days. Certainly better for the environment are the electric cars. But the fact is that to provide all of the cameras and all of that stuff, and if you remember from the picture of the self-driving cars, it has stuff sticking out all over the place. And all of that stuff makes the car less aerodynamic. So it's heavier, it's less aerodynamic, you have more drag to it. So even if it's an electric car, and then don't forget that these emissions, you're also going to get emissions during production of the car. So you have to count not just operation of the car, but production of the car as well. And so the estimate is that you have between 3 and 20% additional emission to this, to a regular car to provide a connected autonomous vehicle. Now, the fact is that there are things we can do to kind of reduce those emissions. And a lot of that are in the category of what you think of as eco-driving. So the idea is if you brake a little bit more smoothly and you accelerate a little bit more smoothly, if you platoon, which is we're seeing now trucks are starting to do that, and we'll see that more and more with cars, a little bit about that in a bit. You can actually sort of do things more efficiently. And that should give us 9 or 10% better performance for these cars. But of course, that's not really the environmental impact we want. We want an environmental impact that comes from not just these kinds of strategies, but also better design. So one thing we can do is posit what will cars look like in 2050. And I fought with myself about whether to give you a Jetsons picture for this, but decided not to. In 2050, cars are not going to resemble, I think, anything we've seen. And so here are some designers' ideas about what cars might look like. Today's car is thousands of pounds. The new right-sized pods that we will be traveling in, and right-sized means I order up a car in rideshare and it says how many people, and I says, oh, just me. And they say, okay, we're sending your pod. And that's hundreds of pounds. So they've made it lighter, they've made it faster, it can go more miles an hour. They've jettisoned some of the safety equipment. So now I have fewer accidents, but maybe those accidents will be more severe. There's a trade-off right there. But what we'll see in 2050 is we'll see more eco-driving because all of these cars will do that. We'll see higher speeds. We'll see congestion mitigation because all of these cars will be connected to one another. And so a lot of the times that traffic jams up will be handled by this big connected car system. We're also going to see more mobility. So if you have to pick up the kids from school, just send the car. If you want mom or dad to come for Thanksgiving dinner, you might just send the car. And that car, and you might be able to, send a car to someone hundreds of miles away, because those cars are going to be going not tens of miles an hour, but hundreds of miles an hour. So if you think about this, it changes everything. And this is just the cool technology part of it. So let's think again about the Industrial Revolution. Remember, the most important part, arguably, of the Industrial Revolution was not the gee whiz cool manufacturing that you could do, but how it was going to change society. So how will these things change society? And it turns out that they're going to change society in a tremendous number of ways that we haven't even thought of. It's going to change how we settle in cities. So if this car can go hundreds of miles an hour, and I can do anything I want in it. I can work, I can sleep, I can watch a movie, I can meet with friends, I can have a meal. I can do anything I want in this car. Maybe I'm going to live in Washington, D.C. and work in Boston. Or maybe I'm going to visit the relatives in Chicago and just take a few-hour car trip, or, well, I don't know how many hours. But the idea is that it will really change that. Police don't need to get these cars for speeding anymore because that's going to be handled by the system. They'll be looking at doing something else. When we buy insurance for a car or think about liability for a car, we have to figure out who's going to be responsible in an accident. What am I being insured for? If it's a ride service, is it like renter's insurance that I'm sort of insured for, like, yeah, Lexi is nodding her head. That I'm going to be, this is one of our wonderful lawyer fellows, that I'm going to be, just buying this to make sure that I'm okay. It'll have economic impacts in terms of whether you own a car or whether you just use a service. And there may be some things that we want to do in terms of policy and regulation to make sure that the economics of it work for us. Maybe it will make a difference in terms of public transportation, and maybe that will become privatized to a larger extent. Evolution of jobs and services might change. There might be now new jobs when you just swap out a battery. So you're not going to go to a charging station. You'll just have an extra battery somewhere and someone will swap it out while you're at your meeting because the car will actually be roaming around. So one of the kind of most fun things to think about is what will it do to parking? And it turns out that in the average urban center, roughly 30% of the area is used for parking. Now, our cars spend 95% of their time in parked state, right? And so if you think about this in the business center, and now I'm talking about street parking and underground parking, and of course, New York introduces us to this tiered parking, and I kind of spread all of that out. It turns out to be 30% of a city. In Los Angeles, it's 80% of the city. And if you think about these cars, are they going to need to park? You know, they'll drop me off, they'll either go pick up someone else, or they'll roam around, or they'll go off and change their battery, or they'll park offline, or they'll do, you know, a variety of other things. And so the interesting things is now I don't need all that room in the city for parking. What can I use it for? Can I use it for something new, something else I'm going to be doing in 2050? So it turns out that all of the different legislative, all of the different public infrastructure, all of the different land use, all of the different places where a car touches our society are also going to be different. And it's not just sort of the coolness of having a pod. So let's think about this a little bit more. So we thought about environmental aspects and societal aspects, but society is made up of individuals. So let's think a little bit more about how this will impact us as people. And so let's go just for a moment to our IoT success measure 2, our self-driving cars. Good for you. By the way, you don't see a steering wheel at all in this self-driving car because self-driving cars don't need steering wheels in 2050. So here's the question. Here's the question I want to ask. Are they safe? Do I trust them? Do they protect my privacy? So let's see if we can think about that a little bit. So first of all, what can go wrong with a self-driving car? Because I'm not going to trust it if everything's going wrong all the time. And it turns out that a lot can go wrong. Your systems may not work. There may be weather that's problematic. Your camera can't see, or maybe the systems themselves go out. They don't work as expected. There could be security problems, and there was a very well-known experiment a few years ago where some hackers took over a car from hundreds of miles away. A journalist was driving it, and they basically ran him off the road. He was okay. But the fact is, if there are security vulnerabilities in every system, and if we don't expect robust enough systems, these are things that can happen in your car. So we want to definitely design our cars to be more secure, to be safer, and so that these systems will work. Now, what risk are we willing to put up with? And it turns out that the risk of dying in a car crash over your lifetime is 1 in 102, which seems like a lot, but your risk of dying over your lifetime of a heart attack is 1 in 6. So you might want to calibrate that a little bit. Actually, if you can, you're better off taking a plane. Your risk in dying in an airline crash over your lifetime is 1 in 205,000, which is much better. So the question is, how safe do self-driving cars have to be? And the fact is, and I'll just give you a heads up for the next slide, we have no statistics yet because we really don't have enough data. So here's the data we do have. We know that there have been, to my knowledge and Wikipedia's knowledge, 6 fatal car crashes for self-driving cars. 5 of them were for the driver. The 6th one was for a passenger on the road. Most of them were Teslas. That's not necessarily because Tesla is a worse system, but Tesla is a more commercially available system than the other systems that were being tested. We know that we actually measure safety in a more robust way. We don't just look at fatalities. We look at serious injuries and crashes, roadsmanship, which means, you know, how much is your car cheating, People often cheat, in cars. They sort of go outside the lines or something like that. And disengagement, which means how often does the driver have to take over, because all of these cars have drivers in them. And it turns out that the only state that's actually collecting data on some piece of this, which is the disengagements, the number of times you take over a car, is there is a law in California that says if you are piloting these cars on public roads, you need to report for vehicle mile travels your number of disengagements. So of all of the cars that are traveling, Waymo and GM are number 1 and 2, and here is their reported statistics for 2018. Now, it turns out that the vehicle mile travels for all of the cars is only roughly 2 million miles, so it may not be as ubiquitous as it will be. But it's sort of interesting if you ask the question, what's my risk of dying in a self-driving car over my lifetime? It's clear we do not have enough data. We just don't have enough data to be able to answer that, and that's part of what we need to do. So one thing you would expect is for states to expect companies to report that. But that's another problem, is that legally, we have a whole patchwork of things. So I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So let me ask you another question next. And the other question is, it's not clear how safe I am in a self-driving car. How private are my conversations in a self-driving car? And so here are 2 cars. One of them is mine, and one of them is Alyssa. Alyssa put on the entertainment for the purposes of this photo, but we were not driving and watching a movie at the same time. And my car is a level 1. Alyssa's is arguably a level 3. And the data collected about you in many cars, including self-driving cars, technical data, societal and crowdsourced data, and personal data. Now, my card pretty much collects technical data. Not so much crowdsourced data, not so much personal data, because it doesn't have the stuff to do it. But Alyssa's car does. So the question is, which of our cars is more private? If we want to commit a crime together, Alyssa and I, and we want to have that conversation in a car, should we do it in my car or Alyssa's car? We should do that in my car. I'd just like to point that out. The personal data that self-driving cars collect may include a lot of stuff. It certainly includes where you go. It includes, where you are. It might include what you're doing or saying. If you want to talk to OnStar has to be listening to you, right? It includes how you drive. It includes your biometrics, so you're putting your hand on the wheel, and it may figure out other things about you. It might include how much alcohol you consume. You've seen those little insurance plugins that don't let you start the car if you've had too much alcohol, avoiding drunk driving, so that's a good thing. It might include what you've listened to. It might include your phone calls, your tweets, or the websites that you use through the car. And the question is, what is that information used for? In Alyssa's car, Elon Musk gets to decide that, because there are no laws protecting any of that data from leaving the manufacturer and not being shared in exchange with other kinds of manufacturers. So that information could be exchanged with law enforcement, or insurance companies, or courts of law, or somebody who wants you to go to their coffee place instead of your coffee place so they can market to you, or all kinds of other things. And without protections for us and our privacy in these cars, something needs to be done in order to make that a private space like my car is. So, what do the laws look like for privacy and for safety and for data that we might get? And it turns out that the US has a tremendous patchwork of laws. And so if you look at, and there are very few federal laws that cover these things. So if you look at the states, and I do the proverbial road trip on Route 66 between Chicago and LA, I'm going to California, where California has a number of different laws on self-driving cars, including reporting vehicle miles, travel, and engagements. I'm also going through Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, where there is very little legislation that tells me anything about it. And that also gets us to the harmonization problem. So what happens if your car is crossing a state boundary and one state has a very different law than another state? How do the vendors deal with that? How do the drivers deal with that? How does anybody deal with that? So it turns out that all of these things are really important, and that the legal system will have to provide a framework which allows us to deal with self-driving cars. Now, I don't want to end the self-driving car part without telling you that, as a technologist, the technologies behind all of these things are tremendously important. And so that anything that has societal and environmental repercussions are something that we can try to deal with in the design and the architecting and the implementation and the manufacturing and the operation of these cars. And it is not easy. So if I think about what happens to the data, here's a really good question. And the stewardship of the data, where does it live? Does it live in my car? Does it live in the cloud? Where should it be hosted? How long do I have to retain it? What kind of metadata do I need to think about that? What kind of access policies? Who owns it? Who can use it? What about the security of these systems? How high does the level of security have to be for my car, or my baby monitor, or my Alexa, or my Fitbit, et cetera? Who should have access and control? And of course, all of us in the research environment want to be able to design and innovate so we have new generations of innovations. And of course, when we try to do science on this data, how much of it is open? How much of it is protected? How can we do reproducible science? What do we use as a control group? If we're doing artificial intelligence algorithms, which many of these algorithms are, how do we be sure we're not introducing bias in them? Or that the outcomes are actually representative of the kinds of things we're doing? So all of these things are really big issues for the technology community. And every time we say, let's do something around privacy, for example, then you have to architect the system to have access control so that things really are private. Maybe they're variable, then in some instances things are private, other instances they're not. And so all of this means that all of this stuff has to go hand in hand. I can't just look at the innovation of the car and have the car be okay everywhere else. I can't just make a law and then assume that it'll be easy to develop a product that actually gives you that kind of outcome. It has to happen hand in hand. So if you think about it, there's an incredible universe of impacts of these cars. And it's not just in the cyber world, it's where it's hardware or software or data that I have to worry about. I have to worry about the impact in the natural ecosystem and the built environment, infrastructure. I have to worry about society as a whole, and I have to worry about humans as individuals. And the fact is, it's not just cars. It's pacemakers, it's smart refrigerators, it's whatever your IoT devices are. And so as we said in the beginning, there are many places you can actually tune the IoT to be a more beneficial, more utopian IoT. If we think about this for cars, we can think about tuning it so that it's fewer emissions. That takes it more towards the public interest. That we can make them safer. That again takes it more towards the public interest. When we think about things that use computers, we want to avoid depleting rare materials. 70% of our batteries are lithium. Lithium and the other kinds of materials that you see, some of them are tremendously expensive or hard to get, or we'll deplete them and there'll be no more. So that's not a good thing. We want to make sure we want to turn it towards the public interest in terms of protections. We want to turn it towards the public interest in terms of upgrading our device. If I throw out my cell phone every few years because my vendor expects me to, I'm adding to the 40 million tons of e-waste that we add to the earth every year. If I upgrade it in software more often instead of hardware, I'm doing less of that. So there's lots of ways that we can turn the dials. And we haven't even talked about the ethics of creating systems that really support the public good. So I know the thing that you're all thinking to yourself is, well, that's fine, But shouldn't Mark Zuckerberg just solve this problem? And the fact is, whether you think it's Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates or any of the titans of Silicon Valley to solve the problem, we're going in the wrong direction. If it is our strategy to haul these folks to Washington and ask them why they're putting business interests before the public good, we're doomed. The fact is that it's really important for the public sector to sort of stand up and really set the lead for that. So what can our government do? And it turns out that the government can help in lots of different ways. We have an abominably small number of privacy and security and safety expectations for IoT products. Now, I understand that we want to let innovation go for a while because otherwise we don't want to really retard that. But we have enough experience with many products to know they need to have better security, they need to have privacy, they need to protect us better. And so what that means is that we have to get more serious about social frameworks. We have to know what rights we can expect in the Internet of Things. We have to know what kind of data protections we have. We need an IoT equivalent of OSHA to keep us safe, or FDA to plan when products can come out. We need guidelines for ethical development. We need clarity on who's responsible and who's liable when things go wrong. And we need to regulate the private sector. And it turns out that when we regulate the private sector, saying you have to do this. If you have workers that work with asbestos, they have to wear the right gear, for example. That's something we get from OSHA. We can regulate the private sector so they do things more in the public interest. Turns out they can do a lot of things in the public interest, especially when the expectation is that they will. They can focus on more responsible design. So that design would be, public-focused design, environmentally focused design. They can focus on more responsible practice. That means that when they look at their own supply chain, they can do that in a way that's more environmentally friendly and more protective for us. And they can help us by being transparent. So we regulate food quality and safety, and the food companies comply. We can do this for IoT products as well. Now, these aren't the only folks that need to help out, because academia can help too. And here at Harvard, we're very lucky to have a number of different courses that some of you who are students have taken that really are in the area of public interest technology. Many other schools throughout the country don't have this. And the idea is that our job here at the university is to educate and train responsible citizens and the leaders of tomorrow. That means they ought to know something about how technology touches society and how society touches technology. And it means that through the mechanisms that we know and love in the academic environment, through courses, perhaps through minors and majors, publication venues for research, like the kind of research I'm doing here at the Radcliffe Institute, education and training, partnerships with the private sector, practicum, et cetera, we can have a set of citizens so that when you all go home for the holidays and you talk to people about net neutrality or data privacy or the Internet of Things, they know a little bit about what that is and what their role is, which is really important. And it turns out that, last but not least, we can do stuff as individuals as well. Maybe not with the kind of big impact that a new law or policy, a good new law or policy might have, but we can do a lot of stuff. So when we buy products, we can ask ourselves, what's the privacy policy of that product? What level of security does that product have? We can protect our own data. If you're not using two-phase authentication for your Gmail, go home and make that happen. We can do that. And we're in an election year. So it's important for you to know, what does your candidate think about this? What is their technology policy? The head of the country has an enormous responsibility to set the tone for where the US is going to be in terms of information technology. It's important to know that about your candidate and to ask your candidate that question. And so there are things we can do too. So last but not least, I want to thank the internet for the sources and images for this talk. There are many of them. And most important, I want to thank the Radcliffe Institute for providing a really transformative year. I want to thank my fellow fellows, all of whom are more amazing than the next. And I want to thank my Radcliffe research partners, here they are, Amelia and Wasim and Ollie, who have been tremendously helpful in this work. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.